dime. Carla, ¿hay tiempo de abrir la cortina a ver si mejora la exposición?
we're very, very excited that you are here in this audience with us in Midtown Manhattan, and also that we have colleagues following us online. We have a YouTube, we're streaming live, so we're also very, very excited about our colleagues who are joining us now, but also in the future, because there is a long tail, which is part of the story of technology, isn't it? So here we are at the Commission on Status of Women, CSW69, in the Salvation Army Auditorium at an event co-organized with APC, the Association for Progressive Communications, we're going to hear from in a bit, Derechos Digitales, Equality Now, IT for Change, and Pollicy, along with Women at the Table and the A+ Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms. And collectively, we and a few other organizations were the leaders of the feminist approach to the Global Digital Compact and worked for over a year. I'm very proud of the fact that we did manage to have a standalone paragraph on gender in the Global Digital Compact, which still stands. Perhaps we'll get to that a bit later. But today we're here to talk about AI and social equality, which is part of the new emerging technologies portfolio, and how AI and algorithms affect, and their design, affect gender, race, class, caste, sort of all the intersections of humanity, and ways for us to sort of look forward to how that tech design can be made so that it truly serves everyone. And we hope with all the very different perspectives gathered here that we'll be able to sort of reimagine AI a bit and have some new ideas about what having a feminist and having an intersectional lens might mean in this technology play. So we're going to open first with I will introduce everybody in a bit. Actually, let me introduce everybody now, and then I'm going to say a few things about technology before I hand over to our keynote from Eleonore, Fournier-Tombs, and then our panel with our amazing colleagues sitting over on this side of the table, Karla, Velasco, Ramos, who is the Association for Progressive Communications, APC, Women's Rights Program, Policy Advocacy Coordinator, who went to the ITAM, the Autonomous University in Mexico, and was also the regional coordinator of Connecting the Unconnected, which was implemented by APC and Rizo Matica via the, let's see if I get this right, Redes para la Diversidad, Equidad y Sostenibilidad. Oh, wow, okay, there you go. And she's very, as you will hear, she's very passionate about community networks, internet governance, gender studies, and human rights. And then sitting right next to me is Sophie Carol WANYENZE, who's the founder and the co-team leader of Queer Women Leaders Uganda, leading efforts in women's political participation, mental health, SRHR advocacy, and GBV, IPV, that's gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, research for marginalized communities. She's a Mandela Washington Fellow and certified community organizer, sitting on the board of Equality New York, and currently attending the Center for Community Leadership Academy in New York. All right, so we're going to hear from all of our colleagues here. I'm Kraft Buchman. I'm the founder and CEO of Women at the Table, which is the mother of a number of other NGOs, as well as its own advocacy organization. We co-founded the A+ Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms, which does advocacy and works for a free feminist future, where the A+ Alliance has a daughter, so we're the grandmothers then in that case, of the Feminist AI Research Network, which had networks in Latin America, Middle East, North Africa, and Southeast Asia, making technology as well as networking. And we also are the founders and runners of the AI and Equality Network, which today, as you are all invited to join, has about 550 different researchers and activists from over 57 countries who are looking at AI and what that means in a socio-technical approach. How does this affect society? What does that mean? So we have feminist researchers with technologists, computer science professors. It's a very eclectic and wonderful community. And then over here to my immediate left is our keynote and also panelist, Eleonore Fournier-Tombs, who is the head of Anticipatory Action and Innovation, and a senior researcher at UN University, and a research lead for the UN's high-level advisory body on artificial intelligence. I know Eleanor quite well, but I have to read her whole bio because I think it will give you a context for some of her remarks. During her career, she's worked as a data scientist throughout the UN system and conducted research on the intersection of technology and gender, migration, democracy, and health. And in 2012, she was awarded the UN 21 Award by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for her work on the Rio +20 conference. She worked for the Human Development Report Office for 3 years, where she managed human development data and online communications. Between 2015 and 18, she went for her PhD. She took some time off for the University of Geneva, during which she developed a machine learning method to measure the quality of political deliberations online. And then was awarded a postdoc at McGill, where she worked on using the tools to analyze parliamentary debate in the Canadian territories of Nunavut, Yukon, and Northwest Territories. Super cool. We'd love to hear about your adventures there. And then she worked as a data scientist at the Center for Humanitarian Data, OCHA, where she contributed to modeling COVID-19 in countries experiencing humanitarian crisis, continued that work at the World Bank, and participated there in climate-related policy research in Afghanistan, Morocco, and Jamaica. And then she founded, my God, it's not even over, but she founded a research lab in 2021 in the research chair on accountable AI in a global context at the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Law. So we're so excited that you're here with us with that amazing introduction. I'm going to turn the floor over to you for an intro, basically, on the topic of women in AI, to hear what you have to say. We're sharing a mic. So.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Thank you for having me. I hope I can live up to that. I think one of the things I wanted to say about my background is because I came into the UN and the global affairs space through data science. I actually studied political science originally, my bachelor's, but I was really too intimidated to try to go into policy. So I did communications and I learned how to develop websites, and then I got into data and I kind of got into the UN system through the technology route. And after some time starting to work more in the AI space, I worked, as Caitlin mentioned, for the Center for Humanitarian Data and the World Bank in doing using predictive analytics, so basically machine learning techniques to predict humanitarian needs during disasters. We did a lot of work during COVID-19 to try to understand what would happen if you already have a humanitarian crisis and then you add COVID to that. So we worked, for example, in Yemen or in different countries that were already experiencing humanitarian crises. And the reason I'm telling this story is that one of the things that happened is that I was working at this research lab at the University of Ottawa and in the Faculty of Law. And we started looking at the European Union's Draft AI Act that was published in April 2021, and which broke down AI in terms of risky applications, saying, if you have an application of AI that's high risk, you should certify it before deployment to make it more safe. And some of the applications of AI included biometric identification, the use of AI for the attribution of social services, in the judicial system, AI in education. So all the kinds of AI tools that were actually very commonly used in the humanitarian system, or more increasingly used in the humanitarian system in international development. But I also learned that most projects in international development and humanitarian aid would not be subject to any kind of national or regional legislation. And so in addition to that, when we use AI in these spaces, typically the people that are kind of subject to the predictions are people in situations of extreme vulnerability. So if there's an error, if there's a cybersecurity leak, if there's bias in the systems, they're impacted so much more. For example, somebody in a situation of forced migration is impacted so much more than somebody who is in a stable situation. And that's how I really got into the question of policy, because I felt that this was a moment that was so important for us to understand. And the question of women in AI is extremely interesting. I mean, we're at CSW, we have some amazing frameworks for understanding gender equality. And I started looking at CEDAW and looking at different elements and different articles for kind of guidance on understanding AI. And so there's many relevant articles. Obviously, the first article, which talks about non-discrimination, which really is quite relevant for AI, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. Article 5 on stereotyping, Article 12 on access to employment. So a really, really solid framework on trying to understand how does AI affect really pre-existing values and norms in relation to women's rights, and what are the potential risks of ignoring those in AI development, and then how can we harness the opportunities of AI to really enhance women's equality. So in the research that I've done with my team, we look at understanding 4 categories of risk in AI. And I do talk about my technical background to say that I'm not a techno-pessimist. I don't think the technology is bad. I don't think we should eliminate all AI. But I think it's really important to understand the risks, because if we just let them go, we really have a threat to the gains, the somewhat gains in women's equality that we've done. So one example of risk of AI tools is very common now is the question of stereotyping. So stereotyping is when an AI tool produces an output that categorizes a group of the population in a way that makes them seem inferior to another group. And we've seen, I started doing this research and we really saw it in translation algorithms. So we would see, I don't know if you've seen these kinds of experiments, but you would put a language, some text that had no gender pronouns, and in a lot of Asian languages, you have no gender pronouns, and you could put text in that, and then basically the translation algorithm would be forced to pick a pronoun. And invariably, in Google Translate, the translation algorithm would pick a pronoun based on traditional gender roles. So if you put, he, she is coding, he, she is programming, he, she is cleaning the house, he, she is taking care of children, he, she is dancing, because in, I guess, North American culture, dancing is associated to women. That's not the case in every culture. The Google Translate would say, for programming, for leading, for philosophy, all of that, the pick pronoun will be male. And then for anything related to the private sphere, to care work, the pronoun will be female. And things like beauty, dance, fashion, that will be also female. Microsoft, the translation algorithm, would just completely exclude the female pronoun and just pick male pronoun. Now that we have generative AI, we see a lot of these patterns repeated in the tools. And there's been a lot of debate in terms of how to unpack that and what kind of guardrails to put in place in order to avoid that. Because these generative AI tools have been trained on so much trash from the internet, there's a lot of gender inequality, there's a lot of misogyny on the internet, and that means that a lot of these tools continue to perpetrate these traditional gender norms. And I think my fear is that we continue to be exposed increasingly to content that is AI generated, and we become kind of stuck and unable to break free in these traditional gender norms. And I think this also affects men a lot. Men that want to take more of a nurture role, more of a care role, to kind of break free from their own traditional gender norms as well, are also impacted by content that kind of rigidifies basically the division of labor in our society. Another type of risk is discrimination. And so discrimination is basically when an AI tool has basically has a higher rate of error or produces, again, an output that is different for a group just because of their belonging to that group. And so we've seen that in hiring algorithms. So we've seen AI tools that basically would discriminate against women. For example, an AI tool that is used to analyze CVs when you upload your CV into an online platform. This has happened for Amazon, for example. The tool would just basically cancel the application because there's some female pronouns in the application. So these are all kinds of different tools and different risks in AI. So I think I'll pass it on to Caitlin, and maybe I'll come back to some of the next steps in the global governance of AI after.
Maybe I'm going to wind up seeing if yours work, and you and I are going to share one after. It might be easier. I want to thank you, Eleonore, on that. I want to say a couple of things just to add to +1 and counterpoint. With CEDAW, we know also the great definitions they have of formal equality and substantive equality, which become very relevant in this conversation. So formal equality is everybody's got, we usually use this slide with an apple, so everybody gets to have one apple from the tree, and that's great, equal opportunity. But substantive equality is understanding that everybody isn't able to reach the apple in the same way. Some people have shorter arms, or they're sort of, or closer to the ground, or there are structural barriers. Another way people use it visually is a bicycle, right? So it can't be, everybody gets a bicycle, but it won't necessarily fit a man, a child, a disabled person, a woman. So how do we do substantive equality is really ways for us to reach the full and enjoyment of our rights. So that's one thing, the CEDAW, just because you had said CEDAW, I wanted to say. Also, at the AI Action Summit, there was an Icelandic minister there, and he spoke on the one gender equality panel that I was privileged to be on, and he said, you know, we were so proud when Iceland became the first language that OpenAI sort of used on its thing, because we're a small number of people and we don't have, you know, it's a small, therefore, language set. He said, but we've been very surprised to find, even though our president, our premier, our head of defense, our police officers, half of our diplomatic corps are all women, that when you put in strong, because we have a non-gendered language, it always comes out he is strong, and when you put in weak, it always comes out she is weak. So he said this is not our culture at all, but this is a cultural, he did not call it cultural imperialism, but some might. Do you know what I mean? This is being exported around the world. And then you see that if it's fixed, something that's fixed in English will not necessarily be fixed in Icelandic or Urdu or Hindi or Thai or Swahili, because each of these language models needs its own kind of suppression of the sexist, the racist, the homophobic, all the stereotypes. So you have to fix it language by language. And what does that mean then, when we're saying we're going to use these tools in schools to give people access to education, but these stereotypes about technology, or what is woman's work and what is male's work, what is that going to mean? So we need to be aware of the potential, but also aware of the risks, which are very important. And then also just to Eleanor, when she was talking about the credit card, we're talking about the Amazon recruitment algorithm, but also with the, as recently, this Apple Goldman Sachs credit card. What happens is that they, is the first thing people who are maybe not so into technology say is, well, we'll make everything blind to gender, and then therefore everything will be neutral, and nobody will see color, nobody will see women or men. But the fact is that the machines, which learn patterns, wind up proxying gender in there. So we had this Apple Goldman Sachs credit card where men were given 10 times the credit of their wives who had the exact same tax returns. Why was that? Because historically in the data, it proxied for gender, even if gender wasn't apparent, and decided historically women got 10th of the credit, therefore it would continue. And very sadly, the judge adjudicated in favor of this continuing response, even though, much to their credit, Apple and Goldman Sachs took their credit card off the market. So everything gets proxied. Things are sort of inside, sort of swimming around this this kind of soup that we have. So I just wanted to, just as a +1 to much of what Eleanor said. So we're gonna have a kind of a series of questions that sort of take us from the community, from communities up to sort of regulatory frameworks for everybody. So I think I'd like to start at the end. I'm going to start from that end and coming here to Karla, just to ask sort of how your communities that you're working with are using AI and tech, and some examples and practices as we work through. Thanks.
Hello everyone, how are you? How is it going on week 2 of CSW? Thank you very much for being here, and going back to Caitlin's question, and thank you so much for that very important introduction, because I know that for some of you it might be well, it's not an initial conversation on AI, because AI has been around for a very long time. But focusing on the question that you said, it's AI and tech. So I'm going to talk a bit about tech and then AI specifically, because where I come from, so I have been working with the organization that I work at, the Association for Progressive Communications, for I think almost 10 years now. And I started working there, and this is a bit about storytelling, so you can get some context around that. I started working there because I was working in a national NGO in Mexico, where the main focus was to connect unconnected communities in rural and remote areas, mostly indigenous communities. So in that sense, for us, it's very common to already have access to the internet and to be connected and accessing all the social media that we have. But even back then, at the time, 10 years ago, it was not common to have access even to data, right? Or to cell phone calls, or just like having access to internet, like a mobile service was not a thing, right? So coming from that space, what impacted me the most is just getting into a space where connectivity was just being introduced, right? Like the questions, like why do you want to get online? What are the benefits of going online? Who owns the networks? Who owns the infrastructure? Like who is the owner of this cable that is going to be connected to the antenna? And this antenna, it's made from who? Is it open source? Is it private? How can we access to the data that it's being transmitted in the infrastructure? So these important questions, I am telling them here because these are the types of questions that we are not able to ask ourselves even on this day. You know, why am I connected to AT&T? Like, even going back to not only who owns AT&T, but all the infrastructure behind the internet, submarine cables, was such an important way of getting to realize and get to the realization that the power that we have in the controlling of these networks is actually very little. And even putting it as an example in the humanitarian space is so helpful, because it's also like that for people that are getting connected at this time, and even for us, you know, like the governance that we have on this type of tech that we use. So back then, when we were talking about how to get connected once the network was set up, it was the question, like, in what language do we want to use the network? Because many of the indigenous communities didn't even, you know, speak Spanish, or there were people that could even not read. So it's like, okay, how can we think of the other side of not just bringing tech, but how can we adapt tech to the needs of the people? So thanks to that, we were able to accompany a process of a cooperative. They now have their cell phone service provider, like it's called, in Spanish, I forgot the name. But they already have a cooperative that offers data and that offers internet and that offers the cell phone service. And even if you go to Mexico, you can buy a SIM card from them and support this wonderful project. Once you connect, you can also access a library that has local content in their own language, and this is how they try to maintain an archive of the content that they are creating. But for us to accomplish this, it was like 10 years of work, you know, even getting recognized the term community networks, because this is the actual term for these networks. Going to regulators, like fighting against them, because for them, the use of spectrum is only for private use and company use, and you need to pay a lot for licenses. Like getting access to the actual spectrum is really expensive. So this is why companies that have all this money can really access to the frequencies. So just getting access to the frequencies to have this type of network was a super big achievement. And I bring this to mention because there is a possibility of doing the same with AI. We just really need to understand the technology that we're dealing with. And I'm telling you this because I studied international relations. I don't have a tech background. And throughout the different workshops and spaces that we had in the different communities, I was able to learn how to install a network and how to install a local server with local content. So it's something that we all can definitely do, but it's, you know, it's finding the time, finding even, you know, the privilege of having the time of doing it. And in that sense, I also want to bring some of the ideas that we do, well, some of the work that we do at APC, because sometimes you think that we need these hackathon spaces, right? Like, let's have a big hackathon and bring all the women from different parts and just like get women to code, which, I mean, it's useful. But when you have spaces, when you think about, okay, what if we go to the community instead? And what if we are in the community for some time and we do some like research around it? And what if it's not, you know, AI that they need, or what if it's not even, you know, internet connectivity that they need? Because sometimes we would focus the project on internet connectivity, but then we would get there, and the actual need was just, you know, like building the social tissue of the community and having more arts or have murals or doing some theater. So yeah, this is some things that we're doing. Sorry, Kitty.
Okay. So that's super great. And just to tie it into, of course, because the AI and social equality have to do with data and devices. And we do have to ask ourselves, we're connecting people, but connecting them to what? Which really goes to the point of making these networks. I want to say a concrete example, something we did at the Feminist AI Research Network with Técnicas Rudas through our Latin American and Caribbean network of FAIR, worked with the Yaqui tribe there, and there was a tremendous amount of time that was spent to figure out, to acclimatize people to what AI might be, but also storytelling, songs, paintings, work with children, and the whole community together decided that it did want to do something with AI and water management so that they would be able to go to the government and talk about how their natural resources were being governed and have a part in the power discussions about the control over the water. And so there's a combination that's been done with all this storytelling and all these really beautiful drawings with geospatial data together, with a dashboard, using traditional methods of the Yaqui, but also very high-tech geospatial bits and pieces. So, yeah, Namaste, how are you doing? So, yeah, sure is. So there are these very different kinds of ways, and we're going to talk about some community stuff, but first I want to ask SOPHIE Carol about how her community is using your thoughts on it.
Thank you so much. Hello. So, when we talk about AI and tech, I will still go on Karla's view of AI and tech. As the LGBT community in Uganda is, or even the women community in Uganda, it's a bit more complicated. But we realize we are in a digital era, and we need to see how we can intersect our own realities and our own uniqueness into AI and new technology. So we have used AI to do like data-driven advocacy, where it helps us to like navigate and see what like human rights violations have happened, or what is happening in different like parts of the world, and how do we strategize and make sure what is working for this country can actually work for us, maybe even if it's amid this crisis or amid this, like when the Anti-Homosexuality Act was passed in 2023, it was so quick, you know, like it was not taken through the whole process of how a law is passed before Parliament, like the bill of Parliament is presented, they do consultations, nothing like that happened. it was an anti-rights movement move, and the law was passed so quickly. So we had a lot of panic as a community. So we actually had to go and do some data searching through AI to see how other communities have dealt with this, and then it helped us to incorporate and see how we can survive or even organize amidst this crisis. But then we've also used AI in aspects to do with content creation. We do a Safe Sisters training every year for lesbian, bisexual, trans, and queer women in rural and peri-urban areas, supported by APC and Victoria Defenders Protection. And we have used the AI mainly to educate queer women on how to do self-advocacy online. So it has actually helped us a lot with content creation. We teach community members on how to use AI and why AI is important, because most times we have biases around it. So we try to talk to them about how this benefits you as a community leader or a grassroots leader. So you find we tell them to, when we teach them about AI and its use, we tell them to go and develop a project to create something that they believe is passionate about them. If it's a queer woman with disability, they create something that speaks to them, and then we give them a mini funding to actually go and launch this creation online and do it in a safe way, so they are protected. And we've also used AI to, for mental health and health, the general health, because sometimes we can't access healthcare as queer communities, in countries where we are criminalized. So sometimes we have to talk to different chatbots to show us where we can get services or which prescriptions we can use, so that we can actually buy them for community members who show up to get support. So we've used it a lot for mental health, even to guide the counselors on how to support better and how to give psychosocial support to the community. And lastly, we've used AI as a community to, what has AI done for me as a person? Thank you. Give me a second. Oh yes, it has helped us a lot with community organizing. As a community that is living in fear or hiding, sometimes we use the encrypted chatbots to actually communicate to our community members through self-texting, through making sure that if we want to have a community session or we want to meet and talk as a community and share love and meet, we actually use AI a lot to do that. Thank you.
Super. Thank you. Thank you, Sophia. So we look at a couple of things here from the beginning of, first of all, is AI even necessary, as Karla said? Then if it's necessary and the community wants it and likes it, who should be around the table actually creating it? And what does that mean also in terms of expanding the table, which will take us to this next question that I will start with Eleonore for. Because it is many people's thought that since this is an all-of-society problem, we need an all-of-society approach. This is a socio-technical piece that we're building, and therefore the people that should be around the table are the people in the community, the people who are also the anthropologists and the social workers and the lawyers and the mothers and the people on the street to say, A, we need this, B, this is what we need, and this is also what should be in it and what should be built. So that's around who is going to be making this. So we have a next question that I hope that we'll all be able to focus on. Is how are we including on both ends, the developers on one side and communities on the other, to collaborate so they come closer together in the tool making so that it's used by and also serving the needs of the community.
Thank you, Caitlin. I think it's important to have this question. Being at the UN, the UN have taken a leadership role in the global governance of AI, and the connection between global governance and community is often missing, right? That's why we're here today. And there's two paths to global governance led by the UN that were approved by the General Assembly in September. The International Scientific Panel on AI, so every year there will be a group of experts from around the world to make recommendations on the risks and opportunities of AI, and some global dialogues on AI. So the UN will be used as a forum for debate and discussion on AI without having really regulatory oversight, at least for now, potentially ever. And I think that it's really important to connect these conversations to what we're doing at a community level and from, you know, a women's rights perspective. One of the things that I feel is really important in the language is that we talk a lot about exclusion and how, for example, women are you know, only 30% of the developer community. And while I do believe that it is a gap and representation is very important, I think it's also important to acknowledge that 30% is actually a really big number. And that we should bear in mind that if we continue to always have a language of exclusion, we kind of perpetuate this notion that it's not for us. You know, and that's something that worried me because I do feel that it's important to recognize the really important work that is being done by women and at the community level. And another example of this is in terms of the promotion of regional AI development ecosystems. So, you know, we hear in the media a lot that AI is only developed in the US and China and maybe Europe, but that's actually not true. And often even, you know, giving briefings to permanent representatives to the UN here, a lot of people don't know that there's a lot of AI development in their own countries. And a lot of the middle-income countries are very powerful regional hubs for AI development. Jakarta, Indonesia has billion-dollar, you know, tech companies. You have Brazil, you have South Africa, you know, you have Kenya, you have hubs all around the world that have really thriving AI ecosystems. And I think we need to recognize that. And then within that, think about how to harness those to promote inclusion and to support the development of AI tools that are really going to help people. And I really think that that would be a really powerful next step in kind of global dialogues around AI, is not just saying, okay, everybody is excluded and we're powerless, but to really say, actually, let's look at what's being done. And some of these examples of really important applications at the community level, and then highlight those applications, you know, give them additional support, and see how they can be used as models around the world. And so that's the framing that I would have, instead of talking all the time about the divide and the gap.
That's really interesting because there's this idea of, you know, either you're a techno-optimist or you're a techno-pessimist. And this techno-pessimism thing is really is the language of exclusion and the language of harm, which really only leaves then, you know, if your only other option is to be an optimist, which is also techno-solutionist, is somehow we need to find a middle ground that's really for us, that is intersectional, that is feminist, that allows us to have agency over our own decisions and the tools that we make. I've got to also just speak to, before I hand over the phone, to talk about how developers, how can we include them, or include communities more in the development process and developers more in the community process. Something that we've been talking about a lot is also procurement. And if we could have global, national procurement policies that would have set aside for women-owned or women-focused businesses. So some for women-owned, but also some for just businesses that were focused and co-created with the community so that they serve women, not necessarily, because just because it's women-owned doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily progressive or help other women, right? So these are the two things that we want to keep our mind on. I don't know, do you have thoughts on this? Go to Karla. On the community.
So I personally, I personally believe that by engaging community, you actually get to pick what each uniqueness and each identity brings on board, like what are their needs. Because if you show up and give us an AI tool or a chatbot to use as maybe women in Uganda, and we even have no idea what, like you developed it maybe somewhere in Kenya, somewhere in China, and just come and put it on our desk and like, okay, let's use this, we will not use it. So I'm someone who believes that please come back to the community, have engagements with the community, talk to us, see our AI needs, what we need to appear in this, in this chatbot or in this AI tool, so that when you bring it to us, we will own it. We will want to use it because we were involved in the whole process of making this whole thing happen.
Yeah, super critical. That would be a paradigm change. Karla.
Yes, no, to complement with Sophie, Carol, it was the same with us. I mean, I refer a lot to Access because we have a lot to learn from Access now, speaking about AI. Because even when we were working with the Mexican government on setting up the antennas, you could see in the municipal buildings a graveyard of antennas from previous programs that stopped working and that were there as a graveyard of technology. And if you don't include the community, it's going to happen the same, you know? You're going to have like all this tech that nobody knows how to use because you're not including people in the use of technology. And instead you're going to have social issues around that because generative AI also impacts on the way we interact, on the way we live our lived realities. So in that sense, what we do right now, I mean, we have the community networks program at APC, but we also have at the Women's Rights Program something called the Feminist Tech Exchange, which is a space of training for trainers. So different trainers from around the world, they don't need to have a tech background, they need to have a community background. So what they do is that we gather each year and we talk about technology and the different issues. So an upcoming Feminist Tech Exchange is going to be specifically on AI because we know that it's something that is coming up. So yeah, this is one of the things that we are currently working on.
Yeah, and we know now with Gen AI there's no code and vibe coding, right? So there is, with natural language, you can tell a tool what you want to build. And not always perfect. There's a certain amount of experimentation that needs to go. But with this idea of no code or vibe coding, you can say, I need something that does this, and you might maybe need several different ones. Each of them called agents interacting with each other. But you just think of the same way that you would organizing an event, right? You need somebody who's doing the logistics, somebody who's buying the groceries, somebody who's securing the room, somebody who's making sure that, like, you know, the lighting is on. It actually is just totally logical in terms of the way that agents interact. And you just have to think of all these things actually do have their, and analog, it wouldn't be the right thing, that they have they're basically based on a lot of thinking of the way that we're used to operating. So if that is the case, that means that we, all of us in this room, everybody watching this, can start to think about what is it that we need in our lives, not what other people need, because if you're going to do something for other people, you should be asking them and involving them and making it with them. But in terms of your sphere of influence and what you understand, you could be building things for yourself. And I think one of the things for me that's always been very moving is the Marshall McLuhan, the social theorist, Canadian, who said we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. So this is technology that's being built. We have like something like the clock, famously, which was for prayer, was for something very spiritual, so the monks could come in from the fields to pray, but actually unintended consequences. It became a way of making a metronome to bourgeois society where shops would open, shops would close. That was the way, Industrial Revolution. We also know that about the plow. The plow was, if the plow had been invented by a woman, it would have used hip power, and then women would have been able to have a baby and like do a plow. But plows all take upper body strength. There's no reason why a plow has to use upper body strength, but it does, and it wound up excluding people who didn't have great upper body strength. So what the tools are, who builds them, for what purpose, are very, very important, and we're in a moment where all those tools are being created. So that's one thing. We're gonna maybe talk about data in a little, you wanna talk about data sets? Because we haven't even touched on that. Sure. Now, would you?
What is it?
Well, just that we've been excluded, women in the South have been excluded, we don't know. It's all built on data.
Yes. So AI, I think a lot of us are kind of aware, if you know about AI models and bias, is that you know, what an AI model is a basic, you know, an algorithm that is trained on a number of data. The data goes in and is computed to create a kind of a matrix that is able to make predictions. So what all AI models have in common is that basically they take a bunch of data, and then when elements of that data are unknown, it can make a prediction for you. So you can have an algorithm that can predict at what price your house would sell based on previous housing data from your neighborhood, for example. You can have an algorithm that will predict which bit of text or image you would be most likely to appreciate as a user. So that's what generative AI does in a very simple way. It just takes your prompt and then it predicts the most likely output based on somebody like you, based on your profile and what it knows about you. And so really foundational to that is the data on which these algorithms are trained. And one of the reasons why we've seen so much discrimination and stereotyping is because the data sets traditionally have been quite homogeneous. So I mentioned the stuff that you know, ChatGPT and generative AI tools are trained on the internet. There's also, you know, all kinds of different data sets that are used. So a big example in the US is research done by Joy Bunyawani and Timnit Jebru, which was looking at facial recognition systems and finding that the rate of error for the facial recognition system was much higher for women and then for women of color than for men and for white men. And the reason for that was really almost only exclusively because the data that had been used to train the algorithms was just very homogeneous. And so this question of heterogeneity of data continues to be really, really important because it allows the tools to have outputs that are representative of the population and that have you know, the same rate of error basically, or the same accuracy for all groups of the population, and that's where it becomes really risky. And kind of going back to these humanitarian use cases, you can imagine that when biometric identification is being used to track refugees, for example, entering a refugee camp, to accept people coming into new countries and making refugee claims, if the rate of error is higher, then the risk to them is really life-changing. You know, somebody could be misidentified, they could be deported, they could be sent home. All of these kinds of things are just, the stakes are so much higher, basically, in some of these contexts. And so I think one of the things that Caitlin has been working on a lot has been to think about how do we develop more equitable and heterogeneous data sets. And one of the things that we have to do is take ownership of the lack of homogeneity. I don't know why I'm using these words. Heterogeneous. English is actually not my first language. And really think through how do we make better data sets that could be publicly available and then used for some of these tools. And this is some really important kind of ground and grassroots work that's being done.
So two things. It is life and death, clearly, to marginalized populations, vulnerable populations. But I just want to give two more middle-class examples just to also see how it's affecting everybody. This isn't just a marginalized, this is like basically everybody, but like the 10% of young white guys in Silicon Valley and all. So you have for recommendations for Gen AI, there's been a recent study where it's just, again, two identical resumes, everything identical, except one's man, one's female. And the recommendation letter for Gen AI, one is he's a leader, he's a role model, he is just fabulous for PhD position. And for the woman, it's like she's so kind, she's so team-oriented, she's a collaborator, she's very nice. And you think about, like, who would you hire? And here, people might be using this to generate letters and thinking that they're each perfectly lovely recommendations, but one's probably going to get you a PhD, you know, a postdoc at MIT, and the other one's going to be like at some community college. So that's already changing, points of entry for people who are already privileged. We already look at loans and the way that loans look at. If you don't disaggregate the data that you already have, you start to see women look for loans traditionally in data sets more for education, and men tend to look more for cars. I mean, this sounds very stereotypical, but also does that mean that, what does that mean? And one is easier to pay back and not. And so we also need to be disaggregating what we've done. We actually have a whole bunch of what they call Jupyter notebooks, where in this course that we have, it's online, it's free. You can find it at the Sorbonne Center for AI and also as part of our community. But here that really looks at different fairness metrics. So even the exact same data, even if it's balanced data, we work with a World Bank data set from sub-Saharan Africa, and we say, if you take the same data for an emergency loan for COVID and also for a bank loan, there are two different ways of allocating for this, because one is you want repayment, and one is that you want to sort of give services. And so if you're not thinking about what's the fairness metric, even if the data is good, so first of all, we're talking about first that most of the data is not good, but even when it's balanced, you have to think about what are you trying to do with the data, because all of this data needs context and purpose, that by itself, it's just numbers. They are meaningless without an interpretation. And that interpretation is where often bias comes in, but also a feminist perspective could come in. So now, we need to collect data. Do either of you want to talk about ways that you're collecting data, ways you're thinking about protecting women?
Yes, I want to talk of some of the examples that we have faced when talking about data, specifically in the context, again, sorry for that, but community networks. There was one specific community where data was being gathered, and it was an indigenous community, and they normally have assemblies to make decisions. So the conversation around understanding what data actually was very enriching, in the sense that for example, in one of the conversations that came up was like, what happens when, and it happened once in one of the cases, like there was a family and the network was owned by the community, so one of the husbands wanted to look at the messages from one of the women on the community. It was his wife, and she was like, no, she's cheating on me, I need to have access to the data. So there was a big conversation on, like who can access the data and who can't access the data. And of course it was said that he could not access, these messages. But just like, it seems that at some point the conversation was somehow never on, I mean, it was transcending on how we can use this data, but in most of the times for community networks, it was like, we know we have the data, but we just want to leave it here. Like, we don't want to use it. We think it's better if we, in 5 years, it's erased and destroyed. And we also need to respect that in that sense, in the case of community networks. In another type of organization that we were working on, there was another conversation around data, and it was mostly led by women, and they completely changed the way of looking at the data, because instead of doing things that were, automatized in the sense of bringing profit to the community, they said like, oh, we have already so much data from the women in the community, let's build an archive. So they made an archive of the people that were coming into the community, how long they have lived there, because in that community there were people that had already been a really long time there, and there were new people that were coming. So there was like an intergenerational gap. So they said like, okay, this is something that we have realized in the community that we want to work on, because we really don't know each other. So what can we do with the data? Okay, let's build an archive. So they took pictures, photos, videos, and the moment the archive was presented, it was a very emotional moment. Like there were, people just like very sensitive about that. So yeah, I don't have much insight on how it can be like further used, but this would be.
So So when it comes to data in hostile environments, we realized, okay, let me first step back briefly. So if you look at the Global Fund, they don't think lesbian, bisexual, queer women can get HIV. So they don't program for us. Like when they bring funding for HIV in most of the African states or everywhere else, when they look at key populations, we are not there. Lesbian and bisexual women are not in the key populations. So we are not programmed for in regards to HIV. So what we've been doing is we've been using, we have a mini helpline that helps us to get calls and an SRHR house that people come in to get services in regards to HIV. So we've created a space where queer women can actually show up, and we now are getting data for women, lesbian, bisexual, and women who are living with HIV. And we've done scorecards to help us to even build on data, because we had a meeting with UNAIDS last year to be like, can you add lesbian? Okay, they were choosing the language of women who have sex with women, which I hate. Because women who have sex with men, I could be curious and I just want to sleep with a woman. But then they were not allowing to use the acronym of LBQ. They were saying, if we try to push for this in the recommendations, we could be like women who have sex with women, like how they say men who have sex with men. So when we had the question, they asked us, where is the data? That was the big question in the room, where is the data? So I've been talking, I talked to Caitlin about this today, or the other day even, because I was like, we have a lot of data coming in, but our biggest challenge is that living in a country that criminalizes your own existence, the police can show up anytime and raid your office and take all your computers. It has happened before twice. So like we are now, the way we safeguard the data, we've used encrypted tools supported by APC and defenders to make sure that the data that we get, we don't put people's names or bio, like brief bios, we just put numbers to showcase. So if they come and grab it, people's information, they can track them and see where people are, or come and arrest them or something like that. So my biggest challenge with data is that we do have the data and we are collecting the data because we want to use it for advocacy. But the issue is, how do we use tech and AI to safeguard the data that we are getting so that we can use it, because tomorrow they can actually show up and be like, let's go and just raid and take all their computers, and then when they come for the meeting tomorrow, they will not even have the data to show. So they will still close doors for us.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really interesting. That was actually how, in the beginning in New York with HIV, with that crisis, with the testing, they did it all by numbers. It was all anonymized. Nobody ever had a name. Everything was a number. Which is, so there's a lot of, also just in general with AI, I'm finding there are all sorts of learnings we have from recent history, long ago history, in other settings, and we're not really tapping into, we're thinking that we have to invent everything immediately for this situation, and actually we could be thinking about how to improve on other analogous situations and how to go there too. But it does bring us to the thing about invisibility, right? So on one hand, as Karla said, that maybe the indigenous people said I've heard actually from a lot of feminist activists, less and less happily over time, saying, we're invisible, but that's good, we're under the radar, nobody can hurt us. But the more invisible you are in the data, the more you're outside the data, the more sort of the invisibility becomes codified. So we have this in HIV with queer and lesbian women. We have this with women over 55. The data the health data has never been captured for women over 55 because I suppose after one's reproductive shelf life is over, it hasn't been a priority for any health system. So that's an invisible population, really. And what does that mean in terms of personalized medicine, as well as many other things too? I've got to say that we're also talking about being protected from data collection, but we need to collect the data, and how do people do that? So we have colleagues in Nairobi who are doing Kenyan Sign Language, so it's KSL, and they've had to, and it's been a really interesting project because that's a small language, right? So it's NLP, natural language processing. So now they're processing a language that's also very visual, but also has a super, super small data set. So they've had to go all over Kenya to all the different schools, but also then recognizing that certain schools had more of a male population than a female population, because girls traditionally aren't pushed into school and sort of, so they're not sort of going to secondary and tertiary education if they're deaf, particularly because you have to learn sign language. They wanted to have old signers, they wanted to have young signers, they wanted to have teacher signers as opposed to on the street signers, and to collect all of this. So that's what we would call like a representative data set that had to be collected from scratch. That's one thing. On top of that, you have to do is like, who owns the data? So this is going to be super, super valuable data set that happens, but you've extracted it from the community. Now, the community is going to profit because they're going to have this signing thing with avatars, which evidently exists in Japan, which is really interesting already at the airports everywhere. But this is, but it's also going to be monetizable by somebody somewhere, which is part of the problem. So in addition to that project, they're also having a data commons conversation about what new forms of licensing could be, should be, and maybe could be replicable elsewhere for a small population whose data is really interesting, but is owned by the community, and how can the community keep control of that? So there's data commons conversations are also happening, especially in lower resourced environments, where in Africa, because nobody has really gathered the data of Africans, certainly genomic data, certainly health data, in terms of just general data, that health data in particular could be turned around and be very monetizable to the north, who have do you know what I mean? Who have very unbalanced data sets. So knowing who owns what, where, who controls what is also part of the problem. Sort of threading from Karla to you to Eleonore. Did you looked like you were about to say something. Oh, sorry.
I think, no, I was just thinking. I was thinking loudly. I think what I would say is that, you know, the interesting framework that we have, I keep bringing it back to the global governance perspective because that's where my expertise is. But now we have a framework which is the Global Digital Compact. And in the Global Digital Compact, which is a multi-stakeholder document for the future of digital governance more broadly, there's 5 objectives. Objective 5 is on AI governance, and it includes those two elements that I spoke about, which is the International Scientific Panel on AI and the Global Dialogues on AI. And then Objective 4 is on data governance and how do we, again, develop principles on responsible AI. Potentially we can do other things, and notably we can really better harness data for the SDGs, really better address data gaps. I have a colleague at UNU in Macau who just left, but he wrote an amazing paper that I love and I talk about all the time, which is the excluded groups in the monitoring of the SDGs, and he categorized kind of 5 types of exclusions in the SDGs. And we can imagine that if you're excluded from data collection around the SDGs, it's a bit similar to what I've been saying about AI, is that the groups that stand most to benefit from the SDGs are also the ones that tend to be excluded from the data set, right? So how do we specifically address the kind of hidden or invisible or unreachable portions of the populations that would most stand to gain? And I think the same question is in AI and in data, right? Like, how do we develop these relationships and increase digital literacy, bridge the digital divide, and help communities that are typically not participating in the data and the AI economy. And one of the other things I would say to that is that if you really think about it, traditionally, or in the last couple of decades, women have really benefited a lot from harnessing digital technologies. If you think about, for example, e-commerce has been hugely beneficial for women because women tend to be overrepresented or more represented in small businesses, right? They tend to be less present in large businesses and tend to have individual businesses. And so now e-commerce allows women that maybe have a hard time leaving their homes or cannot access markets outside of their communities to now access global markets. And so that's really changed things a lot. Another thing that's been transformational for women, certainly for me, for many women I know, is remote work. So that flexibility has also been amazing, and so that has been facilitated by digital technologies. And in the AI space, you also start seeing that. So there's some really interesting women-owned organizations, for example, Connected Women in the Philippines, that decided to train thousands of women on AI-related skills. And have them work virtually and remotely, and then they have now, they're participating in the AI economy. They basically do outsourced work for American companies, and they work from their home, wherever they are, and kind of access the economy. So, on the one hand, we have significant risks, I think, and that particularly come up accidentally because women's rights are not considered in AI development if we don't focus on it and if we don't participate. And then on the other side, you see that if we do participate and lead in that domain, there's so much opportunities for us to really increase our well-being and our socioeconomic participation. So I don't know if that was really about data in the end, but some thoughts.
Yeah, but super interesting about also grabbing the moment. Although I've got to say about a lot of these upskilling things, first it was like let women be data center entry people, which is like being a secretary, but also we see now with because I have a friend who has 100 developers work for her at an aerospace place, and they did an experiment, 100 developers here, and then 3 people supervising AI, and the AI did in half the time the code that was as good as the 100 developers, with the same amount of mistakes. So there were mistakes from the 100 developers. So these, basically, it's all going to be changing. So what skills? I'm not even sure what skills we should have, except we should be feel empowered to try and to have agency. I want to say that we're working with a group at CERN that's training girls, and they said that girls 3 to 5 are the ones that they need to grab first. A. B, they need to keep the boys away from the machines for the first 5 minutes, because the girls are afraid to touch the machines because they're afraid they're going to break something. But once they're convinced that they won't break anything, then their just imaginations run wild and they're really brilliant. And I think that's also a socialization thing that also, which is really quite tender about being perfect, about being pretty, about being the best little girl, and that's keeping people away, evidently 3 to 5-year-old girls. And 5-year-old girls who we know in particular, the minute they hit 5 years old, they tend to think that they're not as capable for some reason. I mean, what happens at 5? They go to school, right? So somehow this is all very inculcated, and we have to be thinking about, we can't break anything. That is, all you're going to do is just experiment and try it, and sort of get over the fact that there's some sort of magic bunch of boys in hoodies that know more than any of us individually or collectively. I mean, on that, I would like, I give you the microphone and then think of a question. We have time for a couple of questions, but please.
I just wanted to, first of all, to add on what you shared about the aspect of how digital spaces have supported women a lot in regards to economic, like the social and economic aspect of it all, but then also the political participation of it all, because we are living in an era where women want to stand for office, they want to stand for leadership, but sometimes they can't show up for the campaigns. So we've had groups like Pollicy Uganda that actually have developed like an online curriculum where women can be trained on how to do campaigns online. And it has been very beneficial because we've used it to even train women to do like webinars, like, or maybe Facebook Lives to their electorate, and you find more votes keep coming in. But then also, I want to talk about the aspect of capacity, like the era we are in right now. I think we now have more women whose capacity has been built in regards to AI and tech. And I think it's about time we saw more women in positions of tech, like on maybe advisory committees of AI, or maybe working for bigger AI companies, so that we are more safeguarded and what is coming out there speaks for us. And then we need to see how we can push for intentional and intersectional feminist approach that encompasses aspects to do with gender in all its diversity, and then race, and then social and economic disparities. And then I wanted to talk about like AI we need to also put the humanity in AI, because it's going to work for humans. If you don't put humanity in AI, it will lead to harm or bias. So if the developers that are creating the AI need to put in humanity, you need to be human and you need to have some bit of compassion before you produce this, because if you don't, you're going to end up creating a lot of biases or harming people out there without even knowing that you're actually doing it. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. You know, we have this, at AI Inequality, we have this human rights-based approach to the AI life cycle. So we were working with, which is a fabulous methodology, I highly suggest it to everybody. We were working with, and we continue to work with, the African Center for Technology Studies. And they, in this first iteration, as we were developing the methodology, they put it out to all their PhD candidates, all of their computer science PhD candidates, and the first question was like, was there bias in the data sets? And they all came back, they said, yes, we had bias. But they all talked about statistical bias, and not one of the candidates talked about social bias, because none of them, in a very rigid educational system, all educational systems are rigid, right? You're on the math, physics track, or you're on the humanities track, so people aren't trained in human rights approaches or social approaches, so they weren't aware of the fact that they would have societal bias. And so we need to help the developers by explaining to them it's socio-technical, but I think that one of the ways it is to expand the table, to expand the bench and say that all development needs to have technical people, but only partly, but also the communities, and then also maybe who are the social experts. I don't like the word expert, because that also is hierarchical.
Something really small. I wanted to talk, just something small that I don't want to forget, is that how do we as a community do fundraising and philanthropy so that we can fund community-led, like either grassroots or community-led AI initiatives, so that the money that doesn't only always go to the corporates, at least the money gets to the women or the groups that really need to do the work.
Yeah, for sure. Because I don't think, for what you said, that the corporations women should be running. I'm not so sure that a corporate structure is ever going to really be very
Just have
flexible within this. So that's why we have to make our own companies. Yeah.
And have a seat at the table.
Yeah. Who is, you do? Where would we do?
Maybe I can talk loud enough. I don't know.
Well, we have this streaming thing, so I'm going to.
I just want to start by saying this was wonderful. I learned a lot, and this is so, so important. But I'm also very ignorant.
Sorry, so they had their hands up first, sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead. Do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I have, after the praise, one question. I need to read more, and I need suggestions. And we have fellow cellists in the orchestra, so maybe she could give me a list of what I should read. That's number one. Number two, I am a writer, and I'm in the middle of writing a book, and I don't want AI to have it, particularly while I am writing, because you learn and you change, and I don't want it. And I was told that if I saved in pages, it would be safe, so that's another one. Oh, and the other one, just very quickly. At the UN, I have worked with trying to get, for about 15 years, 20 years, widows. Okay, and we've got it, so we get mentioned by the SG, but we don't have data. And we try and try to get data. If you don't have data, you don't drive policy. And meanwhile, widows are increasing, and we did some parallel events that would make you cry.
Yeah, no, I know I'm a widow too, so I know what that is, and I'm sure there isn't data. On terms of the books, I would say, we're going to pass it to Eleanor. I don't know what to do running around because I want to go here too. I would say Data Feminism would be the first book I would read. Most fun. Okay. 2 books, and then next one.
Okay. Can I plug my own book?
Yes! Eleanor wrote an amazing book.
It's called Gender Reboot. So it's all about these topics of women and AI. Gender Reboot.
Gender Reboot.
And Caitlin wrote the foreword. And I'll just say that Susan sits in front of me in the orchestra and is a beautiful cellist. In terms of the protecting your data when you're writing, I do think about that a lot too. There's also a setting in Microsoft Word to avoid having your the text that you write going to train your AI, to train AI system, and you have to turn it off. So that's a possibility. There's an application that I use called Ulysses, which also keeps your data private and local. And Pages, I don't know. I don't know about Pages or not, but I use Ulysses, or I've also turned off the training for Word also to just kind of keep ownership over my own text.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're gonna have the next thing. Maybe we're gonna switch mics a minute. Hi.
Hello to everyone. I'm from Turkey. I'm a feminist and activist, and I think a new developer. Because if you remember, 2 years ago we had a devastating disaster, earthquake in Turkey, and at that time, several with good intentions, you know, tech developers and white-collared personnel come together, and they just develop some platforms for like evacuation, for sheltering, before the government, can organize and do those things. And at that time, with the feminist knowledge in my head, I was devastated because I knew that although those all good intentions are very crucial, but they lacked a lot of women knowledge from it. And so they are coming and they are doing it with good intention, and they are going to go back to their own lives. And so it's such a result-oriented, but the feminist knowledge is process-oriented. So I developed a platform, disaster platform, I'm 50 years old and I'm a feminist, and I found myself developing a tech platform, but it's so difficult. I was going to ask, is there some platforms or networks that feminist knowledge can accumulate, and we can break through these power relations with big technological firms, and maybe big technological firms, and maybe global contact mechanisms shall include grassroots and feminist knowledge.
The UN Global Compact? Yeah. We have an answer from our colleague who's working at the Web Foundation and runs Women's Rights Online here. And I've got to say that we're building with Code for Africa a feminist AI conversational agent that will have feminist AI knowledge. Hey.
Hi, I'm Catherine Townsend at UNFPA. Yes, I think there are many feminist networks. It depends what exactly you're trying to do and what you're sort of plugging into. The one that I can sort of segue into a point that I wanted to share and just ask questions is like we very happily reach this kind of critical mass of conversations on what the problems with AI, and it's important to itemize all the ways that the problems are there, but also getting really specific about what the solutions are. So what are we creating and how does it look different? So, data was raised a lot and how to have more specificity for localized AI. So 2 organizations that we've been sharing out of the UNFPA from the Safety Showcase, one is Reliable, that was E at the end. That actually works with organizations like UNIA, DM, and and Tech Workers Alliance out of Kenya. And what they actually do is they work with local communities to label data so that you're improving the quality of the AI, and the quality of the training data itself is what I was talking about, the importance of having better training data. So we can talk about the problems, but like, who's building the solution, what does it look like, how does it change and impact local. So I recommend that organization, and what's nice about them is they have a model for how to train data, and then they work with lots of different organizations around the world so that those groups who are building their own AI tools can build it themselves, or can improve the quality themselves, and you don't have to understand the full tech stack, you just have to understand the community, which is cool. Another one of the similar kind of vein is Sure, out of India, which uses noise, and they have 3,000 people who are training language on English, because there isn't an English language sort of model. Hindi is written with the English dictionary, but like everybody has English spelled differently. So it's very hard to have sort of a definitive data set unless you're responding to people. People will drop emojis in the middle of a word. So, so being able to have that sort of consistent, iterative updating of the data and the training data seems very important, very local and responsive. So I didn't know, I guess the question out of it is, if you have other examples of what your students are working, so of saying like, this is the direction that we could go in, there are like kinds of solutions that we have. I can also stack this with other questions that
Yeah, similarly, my question is, I know we touched on, like you said, a lot of the challenges around homogenized data and how homogenized it is. Would it help at all if we encouraged more people from marginalized groups, more women, to use generative AI so that we can kind of add to the data set that generative AI is working off of, or would that not make a difference?
We want to have I know, Eleanor, you could be able to have one on whether we can impact the LLM by just having a feminist writing.
Hi, my name is Larissa. I'm from the Migration Youth and Children platform, and I have a question on AI and digital harassment. I post a lot of videos, and I get a lot of hate from them in the comments from the right wing. And a lot of people say, oh, the hate is just bots. Like, it's just bots who are picking up on what you're posting, and they're purposely, these bots are posting, like, AI-generated, like, sexist comments, essentially. What is a bot? I don't even know how a bot works. How do they figure out like what to comment, and how does it even get on my page? Yeah, some questions about that.
Okay, great. Do you want to take that?
Sure, I can answer a couple of these questions. There were a lot of really good ones. In terms of whether or not online hate is all bots, I don't think it necessarily is. However, I would say that a bot is basically really close to what you know as ChatGPT. So basically, it has two components. One is that it interprets text, and then the other one is that it creates text, or other things, but in this case. And so it's interpreting what you're writing, and then it's producing a response. So earlier days, it would be maybe like word-based analysis, like maybe some keywords, and then it would produce a response. And then now it's a little bit more sophisticated. So potentially, maybe, a bot has been created intentionally to scan for kind of feminist advocacy or something like that, whatever you're writing, and then to respond with hateful comments. We've also seen that kind of rogue bots that are not supervised or monitored can sometimes, because we have a social media environment that tends towards polarization, they can also have a tendency to kind of creep towards increased hateful speech. And so the first example of this in literature is a 2016 bot that was created on Twitter by Microsoft called Tay, T-A-A-Y, and it was supposed to be kind of like the first bot on Twitter, and then over time it was kind of dialogue with different users, and it was kind of even harassed a bit, and it became more and more extremist in what it was posting. And after 48 hours, it was taken down, and it was very like heavily misogynistic, heavily racist, kind of like posting aggressive comments. And all it was doing was kind of interpreting text and then responding, but because it's an AI tool, it was kind of getting trained on whatever was like, whatever like there was and whatever engagement there was with it. So I would say that would be what I think a bot is. Quick response to the LLMs, whether we should encourage marginalized groups to use, for example, ChatGPT or other large language models. I think that, as we've raised, it's a really nuanced and kind of multi-pronged solution. There's definitely no reason why we should be afraid of technologies, and we should definitely all try them. I'm not somebody who's thinking that, we need to get absolutely everyone around the world on ChatGPT. We can obviously see that there's risks to it. There's also, it doesn't necessarily deliver everything that it says it's going to deliver. Also, it's bringing a lot of revenue to corporations. So, there's a lot of reasons. But there's no reasons why we can't participate. And potentially, a campaign of having more kind of minority groups participating in the LLMs to improve their outputs, it could potentially be a reason, would be a solution. I think that there should be also other solutions, and I think that
that there's a big appeal to also come up with different kinds of tools and different kinds of solutions. I would say that like one of the things that we haven't mentioned, and I think is important, is that in a lot of these policy around the risks of AI and kind of AI governance and so on, it's no longer a kind of intergovernmental process, it's a multi-stakeholder process, and one of the reasons is that it is kind of important to engage with private companies and at least do the kind of due diligence of raising awareness. It's not always the case, but there are certainly cases where that has changed the practice and raised awareness in the private company, and so even if it's not always welcome, it's important to continue to do that. And so I would kind of say that that's, you know, part of the answer for the LLM as well.
Yeah, Karla.
Yeah, just to finish, and these are my final remarks, so I will answer questions just with my final remarks. So just to say that for many communities, data has also become a resource, and we know that resource can exist as we have water, we have land, you know, all of these things. Data has become one of those things. So we have to also understand that when we use tech and when we use data sets, there's also a geopolitical reason behind it, which is also not, we should not forget about that. In that sense, we should also get to decide what do we do with this data. And in that sense, when you use tools like ChatGPT, generative AI, I have no idea where they got their data from. I don't think, in my point of view, it's not even that ethical. And this is just my point of view, to use these type of tools, because we don't know where this data came from, how are they using it, how are they feeding it, and this is one of the reasonings behind of having the conversations around data governance. So this is one side. Then when we see the tech point of view, in this case of AI, we know that tech is a geopolitical tool. There is a profit motive behind it. So in terms of feminist AI, how can we hack this technology? How can we hack this technology for care, you know, for our communities, for the things that we do need as you know, as human beings, as Sophie said, like humanizing the part of the needs and not having it as a profit thing. AI is not the goal and the end itself, it's a tool. This is super important to remember. We don't always need AI. There are many communities that have decided if they want to use it or not. Even my organization, and we work for tech and we have been working on tech for a very long time, there is a decision, a political decision of not using AI so far. And this is a political decision that we have. But we know that we can use it in the future. Then AI is doing right now a lot of harm in terms of online gender-based violence, disinfo, hate speech, and just to remember that all of these bots can be used as a massive attack, you know, to influence elections, to influence campaigns, so not to forget about that either. But AI is a start of a conversation. We're here right now, we're talking about technology, but we're also talking about gender, we're talking about equality, we're talking about the social, political impact, we're talking about racism, misogynism, you know, all of these things that data is, AI is it's a start of a conversation that we desperately need to have in the spaces and all the digital governance spaces. Yeah.
Okay, so we've thought about the aspect of using ChatGPT to train our communities, but then we have a little bit of conflicting issues to do with like how much can the government tap, how much doxing can happen in between there, and we end up our information maybe being picked from like maybe this maybe ChatGPT, and then it's used against us. But like we use it, sometimes we use it. But then another thing is that my whole point is that how can we come up with an open feminist AI tool where if I need to use it as a woman with disability, it can speak to me. If I need to use it as human rights, I want to say about human rights issues, it can actually speak to me. Can we have open AI tools that actually, feminist open AI tools that actually anyone can tap into based on the need that you have at that time? And then also we need to look at an aspect of like setting up strong legal frameworks around AI that in case something happens, I can report, or in case I've been harmed by AI, I can report. But sometimes you find most governments, or most spaces, we don't have these policies in place or these legal frameworks that are set up. So you end up being hurt, but you can't even report anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. So I wanted to see, because I see that they're going to be closing, and I know that time is so precious. I want to say two things. One is I'm not so sure that large language models are going to be the thing that lasts forever. I think that we're going to go to small language models that focus on sector, that really are very specific and help us in these different kinds of contexts. That I think that that will be a trend over time. And to that end, to say here that we are building a feminist AI sandbox, the first application of which will be to work on technology-facilitated gender-based violence as an entry point, hoping that feminists who are trained with this will then go into their own communities, use the technology, but also push back, whether it's with glitter or with anger, don't know, to the trolls and the bots that are online, but also to use this as a gateway to make their own tools for their own communities that work for their communities, because whoever lives in a community are the people that know that community best. And so I just want to end, if that's okay, because of the time, just to say, we shape our tools, and our tools shape us, and unless we are making the tools, then we're also ceding agency, we're ceding power, we're ceding our lives. So just wish it. Thank you.